Thank you, not only for your testimony about that horrible day in your life, but for your service as a police officer in Chicago. It's not an easy assignment, and I respect the fact that you did it for over 20 years. So let me ask you this. Do you think most policemen that you served with in Chicago or in other places would agree that bump stocks have no place to be sold in the United States?
Yes, I believe most police officers would agree with me with that.
Mr. Kleckner, you and Mr. Smith seem to zero in on the mechanics of mass shooting. When we think of the purpose of the Second Amendment for self-defense, sport, and hunting, is there a circumstance that you think in the ordinary course of life where you need to have that capacity of a firearm?
Senator Durbin, respectfully, I think you're missing a category of why the Second Amendment exists. We wrote it shortly after overthrowing a tyrannical government, and I think that a bump stock, although has no application for hunting and maybe not very much for self-defense, I don't believe that banning this item would stop a criminal that's already willing to ignore so many other laws.
You just mixed two things up. We talked about ending tyranny against the United States, and you talked about a criminal in the same breath.
Fair.
I don't understand.
What I'm saying, sir, is, Senator, is that banning an item or making it illegal is not going to prevent a criminal from using it. It's already illegal for that shooter to be a mass murderer. It's already illegal for them to do many other things that the laws did not prevent them from doing.
So let's stick with your logic. What's the point of banning machine guns?
Well, machine guns, Senator, are actually legal. They are legal for some people to possess. They're just extremely regulated. And I believe...
Is that a violation of a constitutional right to regulate that firearm?
I think most gun laws are infringements of the Second Amendment, yes, Senator.
Well, I think that's where we're going to part company, because I think most people would agree, even firearm owners in my own family, that reasonable regulation is not too much to ask if it means saving the life of innocent people. When you hear Mrs. O'Donnell's portrayal of what happened, you described it as a mass murder.
Yes.
You described it as horrific. And to think that some regulation might slow down the purchase of a device which converts a regular gun into an automatic gun, semi-automatic into automatic gun, is an unreasonable restriction on the constitutional rights. I think that's where we would disagree, certainly would. Ms. Sanchez-Gomez, when it comes to the incidents of mass shootings and the proliferation of these devices, what do you see lies ahead?
I think it's incredibly important that we regulate these weapons. Machine guns are designed to do one thing: kill a lot of people in a very short amount of time. We have been regulating machine guns in this country since the beginning of the 20th century. We made them unlawful for civilian ownership in the 1980s, and we need to extend into the future our regulation of machine guns to incorporate changes in technology, workarounds that the gun industry has found for the current state of the law. And there is no constitutional impediment for doing so.
I think of the situation just a few years ago in Highland Park, Illinois on the 4th of July, when people were assembled for a 4th of July parade, and there were many members of law enforcement there who were watching the scene and even marching in the parade, and a lone shooter got on the roof of a building and fired off, I believe, 83 rounds in 60 seconds, killing 7 people and injuring dozens of others. It was a young man who had some mental issues before that day, and his father decided that a good thing for him to do was to buy this type of assault weapon and practice with it at a shooting range. It prepared him for that awful day which changed lives in every direction. I look at that and think, what is the purpose of his ownership of that gun? Is it to stop tyranny? According to Mr. Kleckner, that's one of the elements that went into the Founding Fathers' calculation of the Second Amendment. What do you think about that?
The Supreme Court has been incredibly clear that military-style weapons are not protected by the Second Amendment. The Supreme Court has explained that any reading of the Second Amendment and of the court's decisions would be startling if it implied that the NFA and its regulations of machine guns was unconstitutional.
Professor Ludwig, when you hear Mr. Smith describe this as a gun violence problem or a crime problem and not an issue that should involve firearms, I don't think he mentioned bump stock in his testimony, maybe once at the beginning. What is your reaction?
I think one potentially useful comparison is the United States versus the United Kingdom. When you look at rates of, so there's a sense in which Mr. Smith is right that there are countries around the world that have lots of guns and very low crime rates, and that does not lead to lots of gun violence. But there are other countries around the world which have similar rates of violent crime to the United States, similar numbers of robberies, similar number of assaults, countries like the United Kingdom, and they have almost no guns. And what you see in countries with lots of violent crime and no guns is very, very few murders. So London is a city that's 3 times the size of Chicago. They have fewer murders per year than my hometown. The thing that makes violent crime so deadly in the United States is the ready availability of guns. As you and many in the room know, we have something like 400 million guns in circulation and 330 million Americans. And I think there's lots of evidence from the data suggests that widespread gun availability increases the lethality of the violent crime that happens. And I think there's lots of evidence to suggest that the availability of these machine gun conversion devices further increases the lethality of firearms.
Thanks, Professor.